Okay, so you've had a great set of presentation today on the earthquake in Japan, followed by the Fukushima accident. So, as mentioned by the panelists early on, so now we start a panel that will be led by Susan Watts, who is a science journalist at BBC Newsnight. Susan will moderate this session with panelists from organizations, including international organizations whose mission have been impacted by the event following the Fukushima, the Tohoku earthquake and the Fukushima accident. So, to just put things into perspective, I wanted to quote what the UN Secretary General said on 21st of May 2011, and I quote, he said, that morning he had convened a video conference to formally launch the UN system-wide study on the implication of the Fukushima accident, adding that its report would be prepared for a high-level meeting on nuclear safety and security to be held on 22nd September after the next UN General Assembly session began. So he also declared it will also present system-wide views on how to improve disaster risk preparedness. So I will hand over to Susan Watts to introduce the panelists today. Susan, sorry.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome to this evening's session. I'll just give a rough idea of the order of play this evening. The idea here is that we're going to be considering some of the issues that have arisen since the tragic events in March following the quake, tsunami and the accident at Fukushima. The focus very much will be on some benefits that could be drawn from this whole experience for the future. Benefits such as perhaps greater sharing of data, collaboration across many of the organisations who've already been involved, involving new organisations perhaps, and how not just the sharing of scientific data but sharing of expertise could be enhanced so that in the future, if such an incident is to occur again, then there can be a faster response and perhaps a more collaborative response too. I'll briefly introduce our panel here this evening, and then just to get things moving, I'll ask a couple of very broad questions of each of our panelists, and then we're very much open to all of you getting involved. So I think there may be microphones wandering around, but also if you'd like to jot down some very brief questions, then with some assistance from the floor here, I'll try to coordinate those perhaps into some structure as well. So to the panelists then, first of all at the far end we have Harry Toivonen, who is Director of the Laboratory of Security Technology at the Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority in Finland. Next to him, on his right, is Wolfgang Weiss, who is a chairman of the United Nations Scientific Committee, UNSCEAR Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. He is responsible also for radiation protection and health in the German government. On his right is Matthias Auer, who is project manager of the radionuclide section within the International Monitoring System, the division of the CTBTO. And on his right, Dennis Flory, many of you will know, is the Deputy Director General within the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Nuclear Safety and Security section. And then finally here on my left, Roland Schenkel, who is the former Director General of the Joint Research Centre. And he stresses he's very much here in his personal capacity, not speaking for the European Union at this event. So really, first of all, I thought perhaps with some very general questions, we'd start by I'll ask each of our 5 panelists just to describe the experience of their organisation after those events that we've heard so much about today. And we'll keep that brief, a couple of minutes. So perhaps starting with Harry, if you could just tell us a little.
Thank you, Susan. My institution, the Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, is the government watchdog on radiation safety, security and safeguards. But we are also an emergency preparedness organization. And when the events in Fukushima started to roll, we actually changed our normal daily life towards 24/7. Initially, it was the pressure from which came from the media and also to give advice to our citizens in Japan. And I was personally given a task, find out how the aircrafts are contaminated and what we can do to understand this situation. We live in a global world, and Helsinki and Tokyo are actually very near each other. It's some 11 hours, and the aircrafts could pass, or actually they did pass, through the plumes. But I had to create a program from scratch, how to measure contamination aircraft and how it's related to the situation in Japan. This actually meant that we did give training to the pilots who actually were sampling all the time with portable devices in Narita airfield, and simultaneously my people were measuring the contamination of the aircrafts. And we could find all the very same isotopes as we today have been seeing, and now understand very well this relationship. So a few lessons what we learned from Fukushima event is that emergency preparedness requires further efforts. We need more material, more trained people, more equipment, and particularly novel technology. By this I mean that, for example, we developed an unmanned aerial vehicle which can take samples above a burning reactor, or we can send spectrometers above these dangerous situations. So these have to be completely operational. They do exist technically, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Some nuclear engineers say that reactors are safe, and this may be true from internal threats point of view, but we now live in a world where the threat comes outside. September 11 was one of those cases, and a tsunami is another one. Maybe there are still further outside threats which need to be taken care. So there must be some sort of a peer review about reactor safety, and these results of the peer review should be made publicly available. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, perhaps we can pick up on some of the points Harry raised there on samples from drone aircraft and perhaps on terrorism also. Moving on to Wolfgang, just briefly, please.
Yes, thank you, Susan. I can provide you with 3 types of very different experience from the last 3 months. One is as an operator of one of the radionuclide stations in Germany, and from there the experience we got on the functionality, the efficiency of the operation, both in the network and here at the PTS IDC was excellent. This was a huge stress test for this network, which is not complete, but which is very well matured. And I think we were successful in this stress test. And what I want to see is, as an operator of this system, is to make use of all the experience we gained to improve the capabilities and to improve the efficiency even more. As a member of a radiation protection organization in Germany, I was faced with a huge public demand on advice, both in the country and abroad, on recommendations on protection and prevention measures. And I mean, we could do that to some extent in Germany with national means, but on a global level, with requests from all the embassies around the world, we needed a good database. And the network of the Comprehensive Testbed Treaty provided a first-class, high-level and excellent performing class of data, which we used to assess potential health risks and environmental health risks. And we needed that almost in real time, because people saw the events on the television. They saw these explosions, and within minutes we had hundreds of requests saying, what is this? So real-time, high-level, high-quality information was key. And the IMS provided this information, and we were very grateful for that. And as head of UNSCARE, who decided to come up with a comprehensive assessment of the overall situation, we think that the data set produced, which has been and which is being produced in the network, is a unique input to this assessment. This will be complemented by other providers of information, but it's a unique system, and there's no other system which can provide the same information. But this is not real time. This has time, and we can look into more technical and scientific details and can clarify the things we have heard about this afternoon and during this conference.
Thank you. So we'll pick up maybe later on some of the points you've raised on the unique value of the system, the stress test that it was put through in the public glare, and how we can really build on that from current knowledge. So Matthias, would you like to pick up on that?
Thank you. Many of the experiences we have made have already been reported by Mika. I will emphasize a few points. As Wolfgang Weiss said, this was really a stress test for our system. It was a real technical challenge. This system is designed for monitoring nuclear tests, so it's really optimized to measure at very, very low concentration levels. We really try to push the detection limits to the technical limits. Now, the concentrations we have measured at that event were orders of magnitude above the detection limits. In the case of the detection in Takasaki, which is 200 kilometers away from Fukushima, we measured concentrations which were more than 10 million times higher than the detection limits of our systems. This was close to the dynamic range of our equipment. It was even, as we have seen in earlier presentation, exceeding the dynamic range of the noble gas systems. So there were clearly technical limits we have reached with the detections we have made. Also, we would not normally expect to get a response over the whole system. With the Fukushima releases, we have seen detections, all the stations on the northern hemisphere. We had detections at 37 stations, we had particulate stations, we had detections at 19 noble gas stations. We had more than 400 samples where more than 2 nuclides were identified, the so-called level 5 samples. There was a huge flow of data to the IDC which needed to be analyzed. So the work burden, in particular on the IDC, was huge. And we are in a pre-entry into force operation mode. That means we're not working 24 hours, 7 days a week at the IDC. So we had to improvise. People had to work during the night. People had to work at the weekends outside their duty hours. So it was only possible by the commitment of the people at the IDC that those large amounts of data could be provided in a timely fashion to the state parties. But you've also seen, even though it was a real stress test to the system, I believe we performed quite well. All the uptime of the stations were quite high during the time. There was a good consistency, a fairly good consistency among the stations. We did the ATM calculations and the atmospheric transport modeling calculations, and as Mika Mikkonen reported, there was usually, in particular during the first time, a very good agreement between what has been predicted by the models and what has been detected at the stations. So there is a fairly good agreement, although there is of course room for improvement, and the data we have accumulated will really be a wealth of information which can be used to improve the atmospheric transport modeling. So I think overall the systems has performed quite well. It has been tested in all its functionality. This was quite unique. We not only had analysis at stations, we also had level 5 samples reanalyzed at laboratories. So each of the functionalities of the system, which would be used also for nuclear explosion monitoring, have been used and activated in this event. Now, on the other hand, there was great demand of data from the outside. As it was mentioned already, this is a unique system. It's the only global monitoring network, radionuclide monitoring network, and which also has a very consistent setup with a quality control and calibrations throughout the system. So there was a great demand to provide the data and also to provide the data in a very timely manner. And this is something where the IMS system is not very flexible. It is set up to monitor nuclear explosions, and we have to follow a very rigid scheme of operation, and we cannot change that very easily in such an emergency situation, because to manage such a global system of stations, you have to follow your certain procedures. You have to keep the machinery running. So, for example, it takes us 72 hours from start of the sampling until the final data are analyzed or the data are available. It takes 72 hours. So this is clearly not an early warning system. So there is a significant time delay from the start of sampling until we can provide data. So this is something we probably cannot, at the current setup of the system, accomplish to provide an early warning, an early response to such an event. However, this system is very well suited to track the global dispersions of the cloud, as we have seen in previous presentations. Now, also we have made, and this was a new experience for us, made the experience that we shared data with other organizations. So as was also reported, we shared data with the IAEA, with the WHO, with the WMO. So these were new mechanisms of data sharing and cooperation which have not been carried out previously.
I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm sure you want to speak for another 10 minutes, but I don't have a long stick, so I'm interrupting. We will come back to many of these issues, so how to best handle a huge flow of data and some of the collaboration issues as well. But perhaps, I should just say, I've been asked to encourage everybody maybe to use the pieces of paper and write down questions so that we can do an initial filter on areas of overlap. So if you just raise your hand, there are people with pieces of paper you can just jot down. That would be very helpful. Dennis, would you like to tell us briefly, please, if possible, about the role of the IAEA?
First,
we don't have time for all
this is the
all
production.
The
this is one of the bases of our production, safety standards. And these are the ones which are relevant to the Fukushima accident. I mean, it's design of nuclear power plants, it's evaluation of earthquakes, evaluation of tsunami, and how to protect, etc., etc. They are not binding to member states of the IAEA, but they are recommendations. So this is our starting point. But from that starting point also we have a role in emergency preparedness and response, and we have standards on emergency preparedness and response, which means that less than 1 hour after the earthquake we had activated our incident and emergency center, which worked 24/7 until very recently. Of course, we organized a number of teams inside the agency to give guidance to the Director General so that he could take the right decisions, to assess the safety of the plant, to assess the radiological consequences based on all the data which we gathered from Japan, from the monitoring teams that we sent to Japan. We sent 4 monitoring teams on the ground, and from the data which we received from WMO and from CTBTO and also from member states. With these data also, and based on the contract we have with WMO, we asked WMO to make a prediction of the plume dispersion, as many have done in this assistance. in the view to tell in advance to our member states when and at which level they might be exposed to the consequences of this accident. We also organized, and this is part of our task around us as Secretariat of the IACNE, I don't know how to pronounce that, neither in French nor in English nor in anything. When we organized video conferences with all the members of this IACNE, which is about 12, I think, international organizations. It's true that CTBTO is not, for the time being, member, but he has been asked. But he came at the mid of the accident as an observer, and I think it would be a good thing to join this this coordination. We made also briefings for the member states. We started on the 14th, and then we had a daily briefing until the 23rd of March, and then 8 other briefings, and also to the press. I said we sent 4 monitoring teams on the ground in Japan. At the beginning, the idea was first to promote more measurements by the Japanese themselves, to correlate our measurements and their measurements so that they can strengthen one another, and also to suggest monitoring strategies to Japan. We had also a mission on marine monitoring, and also the result was to suggest a strategy for monitoring marine release, and the result was large expansion of the number of monitoring points by Japan in the sea. Same thing also a joint team between FAO and the IAEA to suggest strategies for dealing with crops. Certainly not burning them, because then you are releasing radioactivity in the air, but choosing the right crops, and if you don't use them, just try to confine them and not burn them. So that's the sort of thing we did. What we noticed is that, as has been mentioned a number of times, the source term is something quite complex, and nobody got really the knack of it, and even the Japanese, they have just recently revised their estimate by a factor of 2. So this is something which needs to be improved, and I think all the organizations who produce data and who can use this data to improve the quality of the source term, and after that, not only of the source term, but then for the communication to the public, because this was also a big issue. You know, there is an International Nuclear Event Scale, INES, which was used following to the letter by the Japanese. The result was a total misunderstanding by the public. So we need to do something. This INES scale, it's a joint venture basically between the Nuclear Energy Agency of the OECD and the IAEA. So that's something we shall want to revisit in the near future. I could carry on.
I'm sure.
Just some things. Our daily bread is producing IAEA safety standards. It is also providing services to the member states, peer review services, evaluating the functioning of safety authority, evaluating the safety, operating safety of nuclear power plants, etc., etc.
Thank you. There will be time maybe later to say more. Just finally, then, to Roland, perhaps as an informed outsider, you might give us some observations, and certainly the point that Dennis, that you make there about source terms and revisions this many weeks after the event. So certainly in the public's mind, I think there's some bewilderment that it takes so long for what appear to be very basic pieces of information to be agreed amongst so many organizations. I don't know, maybe you have an observation on this.
Well, as a citizen, I followed the Fukushima event with great frustration, I must say. And it started with communication. I was many years a plant operator of a plutonium laboratory and of a research reactor. And the first thing for me, the first frustration is I saw horrible images without factual information everywhere. In my view, it took far too long, also for the national data systems, for the national communicators, to provide information. It was worse than that. When I asked some journalists why they had only critics in many of the television or the broadcasting interviews, they told me, and I checked that, it is true, they said many from the pro side were not available. I think my first message now as a citizen is there was a breakdown in a way also on communication to try to get the best possible information to the journalists who had these horrible images and need to provide a text with it. They have a requirement to explain, and there was no emergency communication system, which we are all told as managers is the first thing you do when you have an incident. You have to communicate and give the best possible information. With all reservations you have to make at a certain moment. But to be not available and leave the debate to the critics is also no good. Now that was my first frustration. The second frustration, in a way, was when I realized the deficiencies which came out from the analysis in the regulatory system. And I hope that this should be maybe still worth a debate at the end. When I saw that not only the national regulator, but also the international system apparently has not the gut and the power to give the citizen an assurance that the safety standards are really as high as we believe they are. I mean, I see the safety standards, but having seen how the tsunami design was made in the facility, having seen that there was no hydrogen recombination system apparently, the venting system which apparently went on top in the reactor system rather than on a chimney. I have studied in Switzerland an evaluation by the Swiss Nuclear Safety Authority who has a similar reactor to the Japanese one. And if you compare the design and the layout and the safety protection, that seems to be a completely different status and level of safety than what I have seen so far in Japan. And that gives me no trust in the international nuclear safety regime. And also the OSAT missions and the role of the WENRA, the Western European Nuclear Regulator Association. I mean, it's not sufficient that it is a club which meets and discusses. I mean, we need to give an assurance that our nuclear safety system worldwide has a good standard.
Thank you very much. I'm going to slightly go with the flow on and where we've come to on this, rather than imposing a structure. So there's a very good question here which picks up on your point there about safety guidelines, and perhaps this is a question directly for Dennis Flory here. So this questioner from the floor asks, should nuclear safety guidelines be made mandatory, and should the IAEA get more powers to enforce them?
Well, I think I can say something about that. Yes, globally, there is a request that the safety standards, so that there is a high level and that everybody is at this high level of safety standards. There is a basis, which is this. There is a basis also to get assurance that this is implemented. And this is the missions I mentioned just earlier. The point is that these missions, they are just on the request of member states. So we go with specialists, with experts, heads of safety authorities worldwide to analyze the functioning of a safety authority. The latest one was, I think, in Spain, but there was one in Japan in 2007. There are recommendations, but then if this recommendation just stay like that, it is a pity. So there is a need for these missions to be, well, some say binding, but you may have different sort of binding. You may have legally binding. This is through a convention. Takes time. but you have also a possibility to have a politically binding declaration. So that means member states saying, I commit to ask from time to time, every 10 years, a mission from the IAEA on my safety authority. I commit myself to ask from time to time, well, 1/10 of my facilities every year, an international peer review mission, and I commit to implement the recommendations which will get out of these missions. If we have that, then I think we will have made a great step forward in improving safety worldwide, but not only in improving safety, but also in improving confidence in safety and in nuclear energy.
Is there anybody else on the panel who'd like to pick up specifically on the safety issue? And anybody from the floor who would like to contribute on the safety side of things before we move perhaps to another issue? No, okay. Well, I'm going to come back then to a point that Wolfgang raised on data sharing. I wonder perhaps, as a general question to all of you, if you might just describe for us how the system worked this time round on data sharing, and if you see any scope for how that might be improved, and perhaps some specific, concrete examples of how an improvement could be made. Wolfgang first, perhaps.
Yeah, I hate to repeat myself, but 2 years ago in this room, in my final remarks, I asked you to develop and agree mechanisms to share information and data, both between international organizations and between this organization and science. This was not meant that the international organizations, who all have their well-defined mission statement and mandate, get together and mix up everything. I mean, this was meant to agree on a system to provide within each organization's mandate the best information in a timely manner and in a highly qualitative manner, and then give it in the responsibility of the other organizations to do something with this data and acknowledge that these were the data given by one organization. This happened as an ad hoc action now with IAEA, I understand, with WMO, I understand. But, I mean, I would clearly see that this be established as an agreed process, at least within the United Nations family and with clear defined organizations. The second thing is, and this has been established partly with some of the verification techniques, what I would like to see is a clear agreement to share this specific set with science, because this is a unique situation, and I do hope that we will never have a situation like this in the future. It's a unique situation which we could use to improve our capabilities to estimate source terms, to improve our capabilities to locate from atmospheric measurements a source, and to better understand the whole process the atmosphere is organized. You have just heard that we have seen signals in the southern hemisphere very short after the release. I wouldn't have expected that. So, I mean, there are things which obviously are not understood fully, and we should make this information available to science to work with it and to come back to us with improved methodologies which we could use to improve the capabilities of the verification system, to improve the capabilities of emergency response systems. So these are the two pleas I would like to repeat. Please go ahead and do it.
Thank you very much. So it seems there have been some tentative steps well, some sharing of data, and perhaps between the IMS, the IAEA, World Health Organization, but perhaps some scope there for building on those. I wonder if, Dennis Flory, you'd like to just maybe react to whether that might be a positive way forward.
Absolutely. In fact, we are, for the time being, organizing the data we gathered on the ground in Japan, and which we received also from Japan, and which we received also from the member states, so that this is available in a usable format, and particularly for Anne's care. I must say also that the sharing of data from CTBTO was done on a voluntary basis from CTBTO, on an ad hoc basis, and this was a very good initiative. But obviously we may want to have that more organized in the future. I will not say for the next accident, because I hope there won't be, but for the future.
How important is it that you have that sharing of data more formalized, perhaps with support maybe from the ministerial meeting that's coming up at the end of this month? Is that necessary, or do you think there's really no need for that?
This is not the first priority. The first priority is for a strengthening of safety. This is really my gut feeling. But in case of an accident, what is needed is first, well, you know, to evacuate people. You need to have a good estimate of from where you must evacuate people. The first thing is, if you wait for measurements, it will be too late. So you must do that on modelization. And modelization, you need to prepare that in advance. And then you adjust when you have measurements available. And these measurements are crucial also to adjust in the right way. And as it is always a very difficult economic decision for governments to evacuate people, hundreds of thousands of people, you need to have the best estimate.
Is there anybody on the panel who'd like to come in? Harry, would you like to come in?
A little bit about this data sharing. So this CTBT data was extremely useful simply because it was available to the stage party through agreed formats and protocols, so it was technically possible, and we trust in its quality and we can check its quality. So if somebody else is providing data, how we can trust that data? What are the formats and protocols? How can we use them rapidly in such a situation? So besides having agreements between organizations, we need also lots of technical standardization, formats and protocols, how data is transferred to other parties. And actually CTBTO is the only one who has done a very rigid format and protocol for that purpose. But there are many other organizations who provide data, say, for nuclear security or safeguards purposes or whatever, and that's a different world. So we need more standardization to be able to technically work together.
I mean, it's simply common sense that data are shared, in particular in emergency situation. In addition, CTBTO and the IAEA have many member states in common. And if there are few who are not able, maybe you can find a voluntary arrangement with the majority of all the others to do it. And you get already corroborative data which permits the IAEA, in the case of an emergency, in order to get better conclusions and a better description. I mean, you have to take a pragmatic way forward.
I will throw this open to the floor in a second, but can I just pick up on a point that you made there about the public perception of the event and the mismatch perhaps between what they were seeing on television and the information content there about level of risk. Do any of the panel members, you've talked about the importance of sharing data within the organisations of the UN, the many organisations, but do you see a role for more direct sharing of data with the public? And if so, what form might that take to be most valuable to the public? Wolfgang again, perhaps.
Well, of course, you have to share the information with the public, but you don't just throw numbers on the desk. You say, these are the numbers, this is the rationale for a conclusion, what this means. I mean, the public is interested in, is it black or white? Is it good or bad? Is it harmful or healthy? So sharing this information with the public is one thing, but you have to assess what it means at the same time. And this can be difficult in times if you have little information, if you have uncertainty, because the public is not interested in scientific uncertainties. They want to know yes or no. So it's a high requirement to provide this information to the public and provide the best assessment of what it means. But at the end of the day, yes, whatever you have, you provide it to the public, and if you don't understand certain things, tell them.
Okay.
If you hide things, they will know. One day later they say, why did you hide that?
Absolutely. I wonder if anyone from the floor would like to add anything to this point specifically on communicating directly with the public, and whether there might be more done really to assist the public to understand the data, perhaps in terms of colour coding or drawing a key which may indicate the level of risk according to a comparison with medical exposure or everyday exposure. Is there anybody on the floor who would like to take this up in terms of how next time round this could be improved? Anybody from the CTBTO or any other organisation? Yes, go ahead. Yes. Can you please say where you're from? That would be helpful.
Yes, Francesco Gaetani from the GEO Group on Earth Observations Secretariat. I just wanted to report on the activity that we conducted at the Group on Earth Observation in the aftermath of the Fukushima and Tohoku Oki events in Japan. A few hours after this event, we published all the data available through the space agencies that are connected with GEO, with the Group on Earth Observation, on a super site, on a website, a web portal that we have on our GEO web portal. And we gathered, and we are still gathering a lot of data from space agencies, but also from in situ observation platforms, especially GPS data and data from the Japanese Meteorological Agency. And all those data are still available and they are on full and open access, and everybody can use this data and can download this data and use this data for research or for other activities relevant related to the emergency response or to the research on disaster risk reduction.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I know perhaps Wolfgang may have some more to say on how the German government had a view on the necessity to talk to the public.
Well, right after it became obvious that there was a release, we were overflown by massive requests by the public. Our policy was to use all the information and assess it. So we provide all the information we have as soon as possible and assess it. We say this is how we understand the situation, and this is what we would like to see to better understand it. We did that through internet because this was the only way to survive. Our website increased the hit number from 30,000 per day to 1.3 million per day, which was a technical challenge, but which was also a challenge to really use all this information and process it. But at the end of the day, people demonstrated to us that they believed what we say. And I mean, public trust in a situation like this is an invaluable thing. If you lose the trust at the very first day because you hide, you never recover. So even if you cannot give the full picture, if you can convey the message, we do the best we can and we do the best to improve our knowledge, this helps on the way. If you say, we don't understand this now, wait for another 3 days, people go somewhere else and you're lost.
before we move on from this question of data sharing and dealing with the public, I wonder if there are any models out there that anybody sees perhaps as providing a good guide as to how this huge amount of data might be accessed by the scientific community. I'm struck by how those working on genetic analysis, for example, deposit material in GenBank. It's a huge international project, and yet scientists have access free to all the nitty-gritty as well as the big picture. Is that a model that might be used as a guideline, or are there other models perhaps that anyone has spotted that might be useful? Richard, go ahead. Do you need a microphone?
Yes, I'm Richard Garwin. I'm on the board of the Union of Concerned Scientists. And it was the organization to which the press turned because they happened to have on staff David Lochbaum, who had been an inspector of boiling water reactors for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so it operated 24/7 to provide sketches from the NRC files of boiling water reactors, analyses of how long it would take a spent fuel pool to run dry with the decay heat that it has, questions about why people said the spent fuel pools were empty when they weren't, and a number of other problems. So as the Japanese government has just yesterday provided to the IAEA a 600-page report, which is available on the web, and the government admits that it was very slow to release information and promises to do better in the future. As for the safety standards, the plants were pretty standard. They had the same station blackout protection as the United States plants. The batteries are supposed to operate to provide lights and control systems for 4 hours. But what was novel, and the Japanese government stresses this, is that there was no provision for multiple failures of reactors at the same site. At Chernobyl, only one of the 4 reactors was in trouble. Here, all of the reactors, and they were all cut off from external power, and the tsunami had killed the emergency diesel generators. So there's obviously work to be done by the nuclear power community, and not just in Japan.
Thank you. In fact, there's a question here from the floor, which is germane to that as well, which is on emergency preparedness. And this person is asking, pointing out that emergency preparedness was a topic after the Chernobyl accident, and now it is again on the task list. What happened in the intervening 25 years? Dennis Flory to start, maybe anybody else who wants to contribute to.
Well, we have developed a lot of guidance in emergency preparedness and response. We have also organized tens of missions in member states on emergency preparedness evaluation. Unfortunately, what is in this guidance has not been always implemented by member states, and all lessons which are known have not been used in all member states. What I was just explaining, that if you are talking of evacuation, there is first a reflex phase, and then you evacuate not on measurements because you do not have measurements at that time. You evacuate on modelization of projections. This was not used in that case. So there are lots of lessons which have been learned, and we have been explaining that to the Japanese government, and they have rediscovered a number of things about the operative intervention levels. Again, it's concerning evacuation, but or confinement. Confinement, one of the great lessons in Chernobyl is that confinement, it works for at most 2 days. You do not confine people for 10 days, that doesn't work. They don't stay in house, they don't stay confined, so it's no use to confine people for 10 days. This is one of the lessons which has been learned from Chernobyl, but not implemented in all cases. So lots of things have been learned. Still, there is a need to have these lessons implemented, and that might be also one of the outcomes of the ministerial conference in 2 weeks' time, that member states commit to implement all these lessons learned.
And are there perhaps mechanisms for making sure there isn't a process of relearning every 25 years or every incident? Is there something that could be put in place to keep that fresh in people's minds always, perhaps? Wolfgang.
Well, what's missing to everybody here is not the standards. These are excellent. I mean, they are well thought of. What's missing is realistic exercises. I mean, the exercises I'm aware of, and I do that for 30 years now, they end at 4 o'clock in the afternoon before the problems start, or when we have a football match at 3 o'clock. The high-level people who take decisions don't participate. They do very simple things and not these complex things. And so what we need is realistic exercises which are well prepared, which then look at the lessons learned and implement the lessons learned. And I haven't seen a large-scale exercise which does this. These are all nice exercises, tabletop, with highly trained people, but in reality, you have the politician who decides, and he may decide totally differently, because he's used to take decisions not based on realism. He may take different decisions, and this is not exercised. And all these complex situations are not exercised. So it's not a matter of improving the standards, it's a matter of putting the standards into real life.
Sorry, Harry, yes, can you come in and listen more?
So what we, from technical point of view, have learned, at least in Europe since Chernobyl, so basically every country has a fast response network. So during Chernobyl days we realized that we don't know the radiation situation in the country, but now almost everybody is running a network, so hundreds of stations which report in real time in 10 minutes intervals. So this is a big thing, very big thing. And I would like to hope that many other countries who use nuclear energy would have a similar type of networks. And secondly, regionally, many countries, well, few countries, including mine, started to build spectroscopic networks around the nuclear installations. For example, my country already has such. Around nuclear reactors, there are 10 spectroscopic stations who report in real time to our database. So then we know what comes out during the accident from these installations. So maybe this is the future.
Okay, just to perhaps bring this back to the CTBTO, there is a question here which talks about there having been the organisation having played a very positive role in the post-Fukushima accident, but acknowledging that this is not the major work for the CTBTO. So given that there are now sophisticated national networks also, would anybody care to maybe define why the CTBTO network of sensors is so unique and valuable, and if perhaps another organisation, whether the IAEA, ought to take on the function of radiation protection or the function of making best use of that data? Wolfgang again.
Well, the network is designed to detect, identify and locate an event, a nuclear test, anywhere in the world with a specific yield. And this requires, according to the treaty, 4 technologies, and it requires networks which are located at places to do this job. National means would never do that because they say, well, this is near the border, on the other side there's a nuclear site, so we place our detector there, or have other considerations. So the design of this network is very specifically related to the mandate, and this is to detect, identify and locate nuclear tests at a certain yield in the atmosphere, underground, in the ocean, and whatsoever. And this, I mean, you have to design that from the point of view of this mandate and not from a national point of view.
Is there anybody from the floor who'd like to chip in at this point? Yes, sorry, you've been waiting a while. Go ahead.
I would like to come back to the part about the data sharing. I'm John Coyne, I'm the coordinator of the IDC and CTBTO. And in order to talk a little bit about the data sharing, I mean, it was really the member states who were then pushing us and encouraging us to then be able to share with the other international organizations. And sometimes it takes such an event to get the states to push us to do this. And so I think we should look at this more as an opportunity that we can seize upon rather than something that is something after the fact. But as a consequence of doing that and generating all the interest among the diplomats within Vienna, we also generated a lot of interest in just providing our data directly to the diplomatic community and other authorized users. And so consequently, we had to address the issue that you were raising of how do we digest this number and, not just a bunch of numbers, but really put it in a format that makes it digestible to them. And so consequently, we very rapidly put together a prototype of a web page that we did make available of showing all of the most recent observations at each one of the stations that was then color-coded based on the observations that we made. It did not go into the health and safety aspect of it because that's another part of the UN and that's far beyond the mandate of CTBTO. But it's primarily to be able to put the information in a digestible form where non-experts could access it and try to put at ease some of the concerns that could be raised. And I think that that's a very important aspect that you brought out that I think that we all should definitely learn from this experience.
We are approaching our closing statements, but I just wanted to ask whether, now that you have gone through that process of providing that material to the diplomatic community, is there a feeling that it would be useful to be able to disseminate that even more widely, or not?
I've worked long enough for the PTS to be able to say whatever the states agree that we should do, then this is what we should do.
Good. Anybody else like to come in on that aspect in particular? Good. So I think we started late, so I think we're yeah. I have many more questions, but I'm afraid we are going. It's 20 past. We're already 20 minutes running over, so we'll have to draw the session to a close there. But thank you very much indeed for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.